Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Andrea Saez, and I am product specialist here at ProdPad. And with me today is Steve Johnson. Now, before we get started, just to let you guys know that this session will be recorded. So if you have to drop off at any time, absolutely don't worry about it. We'll be sending out the recording early next week. And as always, we will be taking questions throughout. So if you have any questions for Steve, you can pop them onto the Q&A functionality on your Zoom panel. With that said, Steve, the audience is all yours.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. Well, I'm Steve Johnson. I'm the founder of a company called Under 10 Consulting, where we focus on standardizing product teams with proven methods. Background-wise, I spent 15 years as an instructor for Pragmatic, and a few years ago started helping teams implement actually ProductOps, which is our topic for today. And here's what I find is occurring in most organizations: that products are getting released through individual heroics. It's a combination of things. It's this person does a roadmap in ProdPad, and this person does a roadmap in PowerPoint, and this person does a roadmap in Excel, and we present this information to our leadership team, and they're like, well, it takes me 10 minutes just to figure out what I'm looking at because everybody's producing different things. Furthermore, it seems that so many teams rely on superhuman efforts to get products to release, seemingly despite the internal processes. And so over the last few years, we've seen more and more companies adopt a product operations technique around standardizing. And here are the 5 things we typically see in product ops. Standardizing methods and artifacts so that everybody's roadmap looks the same, everybody's prioritization technique is the same. And think about, think about your own personal onboarding. I have a friend who recently started as a product manager at a company here in Virginia where I live. And she said, I showed up and they said, well, there's, there's a lot of good stuff on SharePoint if you can find it. But, where's the here's how we do things here book? And, it in their case did not exist. So we see this new role of product ops, standardizing the way our methods and our artifacts so that our persona documents look the same and our backlogs look the same, and all of these bringing consistency to all of these artifacts, and also defining roles and responsibilities. What one company calls a product manager, another company calls a product marketing manager. Somebody else calls it a program manager. Or there's a lot of overlap between what is a product manager and what is a product owner, or what is a product owner and a project manager. And coming up with clarity on what your job is shouldn't be that difficult, and yet it is for so many organizations. Furthermore, your organization probably has a great deal of market and customer research, but where is it? I was doing a session recently with one of my consulting clients, and somebody asked a question about, how do you know how many of this there are, whatever it was. And somebody else said, oh, I still have a login to this business system and all that information's there. And everybody else went, well, what is that business system? I've never heard of it before. And wouldn't it be nice to know where everything is? So curating. Oh, and while we're at it, I go out and I do an interview about my product, and I learn 16 things that would benefit your product. How do I socialize that? Where do I put it? And then furthermore, kind of extending on that idea is just wrangling corporate and product data as more of us adopt in-app metrics, and we adopt maybe a data sciences team. We've got lots and lots of operational data, but where is it? What insights can it provide us? And that's what wrangling corporate and product data is about. And then finally, this product ops role helps us standardize on departmental tools. What are we using for Kanban? What are we using for, are we doing Jira? Are we doing Trello? Are we doing ProdPad? What are the different tools that we're going to use corporately? So product ops is like a service provider. And if you look at it in the context of all the other departments, I mean, we have the same concepts in DevOps. How do we go through building a product and rolling it out and making sure all of the paperwork is in place, and all of the parts of bringing multiple development teams to a common way of doing things. And the same is true in marketing ops and sales ops. So let's apply that idea to product. Every product, has its own backlog and its own set of artifacts, but wouldn't it be great if they were all standardized? And the one thing that I'm seeing a lot of people talk about is disturbing to me. Product ops is a service to the product roles, but it's neither a master nor a servant. In some cases, I've seen organizations say, product ops will take over, will do project management for us all, or product ops is going to tell us what initiatives we're going to build. Perhaps there's a visibility across product that is absent, but don't think of product ops as a support role or an administrative role. It's more about standardizing. And I have a number of friends who have been doing this and didn't know to call it product ops. They were the PMO, or they were the VP of I don't know what. So this is what I want to talk about today, standardizing with product ops. And I want to focus on these first two things: standardizing our methods, standardizing our artifacts, and getting clarity on roles and responsibilities. And so I'm going to show you a tool today that will help, I think, focus where your attention is and illustrate how powerful it could be to have a product ops role building our corporate playbook or our product playbook. And by the way, it ties nicely to the top priorities in 2020, according to a Forrester Serious Decisions report. Of the 5 things they identified as the top issues, guess what? The first 2 are the same. We've got inconsistency in our lifecycle processes. We've got we struggle with clear delineation of roles. They also called out we have an ill-defined product innovation method. There's a wonderful stat from somewhere, and I'll get the numbers slightly wrong, but they're mostly right. 85% of CEOs believe that innovation is critical to their future, and fewer than 10% believe they have the skills in-house to do it. Furthermore, more and more of us are working with products within a portfolio. So if I go backwards here, that graphic on the right, I could see as well a horizontal bar over the 4 products for a portfolio manager, looking at making sure that there's consistency in the look and feel and the functionality of multiple products within a suite. And then the final thing they're seeing as an issue is more and more need to focus on solutions rather than product. I worked with a team many years ago, and I talked about product, and then finally somebody said, well, what about services? And when I say product, I mean solutions. A product solves a problem for a persona in a market segment. And yet a lot of times when I say product, people hear me say software. So software may be a solution by itself, but it may be that multiple products put together become a solution, or a software product plus a consulting service put together becomes a solution. So Those are the top issues that Serious Decisions is reporting. And I want to focus really today on the first two, inconsistency and delineation of roles. So clearly we need a way to take ideas to market. And we need something more than a cocktail napkin. And ultimately, we need to go through some sort of standard process that generates success consistently. And one way of thinking of it is to say, you know, we've got these ideas, hopefully, for discovery. We get these ideas by engaging with customers. You know, one of the difficult things with innovation is a lot of times it is done in isolation. You know, it's like, what can the technology do? But there's also an aspect of, well, you know, what problems are our customers having that we could conceivably solve? So we need a way of discovering ideas and then describing and creating a solution and then delivering that solution to market. And along the way, we've got myriad artifacts. But what I'm seeing is we're putting most of our energies into this describe and create phase. It's where SAFe goes and where Scrum and Less and Scrum of Scrum goes and design thinking is there. And what I want to invite you to do is look beyond that to the before and after. What are you doing to discover great problems in the market that your company is uniquely qualified to solve? And having discovered it and created a solution, have you optimized delivery to market? And certainly in my background, there's a concept of product managers then you go through the development cycle and then are responsible for the launch. And suddenly you go, you know what, I'm exhausted just by getting the product through the market. I mean, getting the product through development. And now you want me to start another project of delivery to market, which is why many organizations have split that role into product management and product marketing. And I'll come back to that point in a moment. We've got some great stuff going on in the world of agile development, and yet with these methods, we can now create the wrong product faster than ever. This is almost a cliche. I've seen it used so many times, but I love this image of the Swiss Army knife from hell. The idea, the true story on this is, for their 100th anniversary, Swiss Army decided to put out a knife, a number of knives with every blade they had ever manufactured. And it was, you know, it was a gimmick, right? It was something they were going to put in the stores, and everybody go, oh, isn't that funny? And they come in the store and check it out. And, you know, I said to my wife, we've got to buy one of these things. And she's like, you're kidding me. You know, it's like $1,200. There's no way I'm authorizing that purchase. Um, um, and furthermore, you can't travel with it, right? But I think this is what happens when we find ourselves really stuck in the create cycle, or what Melissa Perry calls the build trap, where we just keep building more and more and more and more. And if you've ever used an enterprise product of any kind, it certainly feels like we've strapped on a whole bunch of knives. And maybe it's because of the three blind men and the elephant. And maybe you've heard this story. So three blind men walk up to an elephant and they say, you know, and each of them touches the elephant and tries to figure out what it is. And one of the men grabs the elephant's tail and says, you know, it's a snake. And another one grabs his leg, you know, and says, no, it's a tree. And another one feels his side and says, no, it's a wall. And I think in our teams, we have this inconsistency because one person's doing the product canvas and another person is doing the buyer persona and another person's doing the user persona, and they're all using different methods to get to it. So my idea here, the idea of ProductOps, is to standardize all these pieces. Let's have one document for personas, or for and they're probably different for user and buyer. You know, the people who use our product, we want to know more about their struggles in operations, right? Whereas the buyer persona, we need to know probably more business-oriented issues. We need a standard way of doing positioning and launch planning and product stories and so forth. And the question the question here is, if your process that you have today is not achieving its desired outcomes, then it's time to change your process. Another quick elephant story. Um, if you buy a baby elephant, and who doesn't want a baby elephant? You bring the baby elephant home, and if you're not careful, the elephant's just going to wander around the neighborhood and eat your neighbor's flowers or trees or whatever. So what you do is you get a stake and a chain, and you tie the stake. You put the stake in the ground. You tie the chain to the stake and chain to the elephant, and the elephant won't wander around the neighborhood. But as the elephant grows up, it doesn't realize that it's stronger now than the chain. It never occurs to him anymore that you could break the chain. And I think our processes are this way. We've built up these processes over time as we've grown as an organization, and maybe the processes we have today don't fit us anymore. Maybe we need to think fresh, right? And when a team comes together to build a process, they almost always take this approach. Like a stage gate or a phased approach like this. We go through these stages, here are all the artifacts that we build and so forth. But really, the process isn't a line, it's a wheel. You want to be continually cycling through this. And this is one of the things that I'm seeing with project management becoming product management. I have many clients that are internal IT folks, and they have realized that projects are never done. It's not like you get to the end of your process and you say, okay, great, we're done, because guess what? We've got enhancements, we've got revisions, we have new patches, we have new releases to put down. So even projects in a central IT sort of a format live forever. And so we need to start thinking of them more as products and not just projects. And the way I think of it is these three stages or phases. There's a discovery phase where we really understand personas and their problems. There's a describe phase where we work with our dev team to solve those problems. And then there's a deliver stage where we take the product that we've built into the market. Even in internal ops, right? Or internal IT, you still need to communicate to your stakeholders, okay, this thing that we have been working on, it's done. And the thing is, you go around and around and around. It never stops, right? So you start with discovery, where we're going to discover future problems to solve. You then go to describing. We've identified some problems that we want to solve, and we sit down with our dev team to describe what functionality is necessary. Then we sit down with our marketing team and say, here's how we want to deliver this thing to market. And as we do all those things, we learn more and more about the market, which leads us to more discovery and more describing and more delivery. And there are three phases, really, three steps in between at the execution level, that we discover problems and then we commit to solve them. And I love that word commit. To me, a commitment is, hey, executive team, we want to build this thing and you want us to build this thing. Show us your commitment by funding it. That means, probably a full-time product manager associated to this project as it continues on through life. And then we describe it to our dev team, and they create the next set of functionality, right? And so a product management role there would be supporting that creation, but not driving it. I mean, development drives their own. They take the lead and create. Then we sit down with marketing and talk about how we're going to deliver it, and they create programs to connect with our potential customers and our existing customers. And that's the typical cycle. We go around and around. And at the core of this is continuous learning. We learn about customers by interviewing them. And now, maybe strangely, is a really good time to be interviewing potential clients or existing clients. I've had great success in reaching out to people while they're working at home, and they're like, yeah, I can give you a half hour, I can give you 45 minutes. But we learn about clients, now is a good time to like perform retrospectives on what is and is not working in your organization. As you evaluate your existing processes, you know, how did your last launch go? How did your last release go? What processes do we have in place, or do we look at all of them fresh? And it's helpful to use this metaphor of, you know, what methods do we use for discovery? You know, we're going to do some interviews, we're going to do some data mining, we're going to do some surveys. We're going to identify a problem for personas, and then we're going to commit to solve it with a business case, or perhaps just a business canvas. Then we'll go through describing with our backlog and sit down with our dev team and help them create a solution, and so on and so forth. So learning is at the core of this whole thing. And this approach we call the Quartz Open Framework. It's something that a team that I've been working with for a while has been working on as a interesting, helpful metaphor for organizing your processes. And the thing is, you don't necessarily start at the beginning. I mean, you might. I joined a company once where they had discovered a problem in the market and were ready to make a commitment, and so I, you know, built their business documents and then went around the cycle. But I've also joined companies while they're in the create phase, and I show up and they're like, "Okay, we've decided what we're going to build," and I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to assume that discovery has happened, and that was often a bad assumption. But I need to help prepare you for delivery," right? So I would go over and start working on launch planning. So you might find that depending on the scope of your job, you might find that you're in all of these stages at the same time on different products. And as we get into roles, you may find that there's one role in your company that is focused entirely on discovery and commit, and they're building a backlog of new projects, new products, new options, new services. And then once those have been committed, then they turn them over to a product management or a product owner who goes through, for one or more projects, go through the describe and create, and some other group is doing the same thing for deliver and connect. So you might find one team is working on 3 different parts of this in different roles. And so this metaphor lends itself nicely to roles. I think of discovery and commit as typically a product strategy role, often with a product manager or maybe a senior product manager, and sometimes a portfolio manager. Then there's the product planning role, which is sometimes called a technical product manager or a product owner. And then there's a product growth role, which is sometimes called a product marketing manager, sometimes called a launch manager even. But I like those words: strategy, planning, and growth. One of the other difficulties I run into in working with teams is roles and responsibilities are so confusing because, well, like product marketing. Is a product marketing manager a marketing manager or a product manager? And some of them are product managers who are really good at marketing, and some of them are marketing managers who may or may not be really good at product. My daughter was dating a product marketing manager who didn't know his product, and she was so insulted that she broke it off with him. And I said, well done. But these tools, product strategy, product planning, product growth, I think give us an insight that is helpful of what kind of work are we expecting from you. So I've been talking kind of nonstop here. Let me pause. I know that some questions have come into the queue. And so, Andrea, do you have a couple of questions you want me to touch on before I move to the next set of slides?
Yeah, we do have a couple questions that have come in. The first one is, how do you differentiate between product ops and research ops, especially with respect to insights management?
Well, that's a really good one. Well, I worked for a huge software company once, and they had a research or a research ops function that was attempting to be a service, but it was understaffed. So they would come to me and say, "It's your turn for research. What do you want researched?" And I was like, "Well, I don't need it now. I needed it 3 months ago, or I needed it 6 months ago." Um, I don't know, in most of the companies I work with, I have not seen a research ops function, only in the larger organizations. But I would say that, what I was describing in product ops earlier um, might be duplicative. Let me go back to that slide. In terms of, here we go. In terms of guiding and curating market and customer research, I would say that would be the primary role of research ops if you have it. So I would agree with that. Still, it's amazing how many times I talk to product people, product managers, product owners, product marketing managers, and they're unaware that they have access to some data because nobody ever showed them where it was. So I'd hope that if you do have a research ops function, that you've got someone socializing that information with the people who need the information.
Great, thank you. We have another question. What KPIs do you use to justify the investment into operations of any type, let alone product ops?
Well, that's a good one. I'm friends with David Merriman Scott, and one time he was asked a question about KPIs, and I just loved his answer, which was, how can you justify on KPIs having plants in the lobby of your reception area? Not everything can be justified, but I rather than at KPIs, I would measure the value of product ops in well, actually, I am getting to a KPI, into time to productivity for a new hire. Welcome aboard. Here's your playbook of how we do things here. I would also measure it in terms of frustration at the leadership level, which is not easily measured, I know, but in terms of what I'm getting from the Forrester research as well as my own engagements with leadership, they're frustrated that it looks unprofessional when we all produce artifacts from that look different. And while we're at it, we want to standardize on some road mapping software. I really like ProdPad. Well, somebody else might like PowerPoint better. We need somebody to look kind of across all of the product roles and say what meets the needs of everybody, instead of every team doing its own thing. And I would also argue that all of that I just said is probably the same for sales ops. Sales ops helps onboard new sales reps and get them to productivity quickly, ultimately to revenue quickly. And isn't that the same concept?
Great. I think we'll do one more question before we move on.
Right.
And we've got here, what seniority level have you seen work best for product ops?
The people I know, I don't know if this is the right answer. It's just the real answer. The people I know who have a product ops role tend to be senior. They are people who have done product management within that company as well as in other companies, and are passionate about the methods of product. So, one friend, she says, people come to her all the time and say, how do you do this and so? Whatever it is. How do you how do you write a good story? And on the one hand, they probably ought to have training on story writing, but in her case, I guess in her case, they had me come in and do some basic training for the new product team. But she also hosted periodic workshops around an area of conflict across all the product teams. And to do that, she would have to have her, a fair amount of experience, I would think. And I encountered another situation that's not as quite as happy a story. They hired someone who was a experienced project manager, but had never been a product manager. And so that person came up with something that looked more like this. Here's this perfect process where information is available and you have buy-in across the company, and here's all the 92 people and departments that have to sign off on every step. And so she built a perfect process, but not at all a realistic one.
Cool, thank you. I think we can continue, and then we'll do more questions at the end.
Good. Another quote here from Serious Decisions from a few years ago. High growth organizations are twice as likely to have and use standard deliverables in both the innovation and the go-to-market process. So if you're a Forrester client, you can, I would imagine, get research from them that says, hey, organizations that are have high growth have standardized their product or standardized their product management. And wouldn't that be good? I mean, wouldn't we like to be a high growth organization? And so here's the final way to use this metaphor. I've taken these 6 steps or 6 phases and put them onto this worksheet, which you can download from the link I provided at the beginning, and I'll provide again at the end. What is your process? What is your playbook? I mean, before you go off and build something, what should you do in terms of discovery? And I had one experience where I joined a company and they said, trust me, people want this. And so I did trust them and got well into the development process and started hearing real pushback as I started validating the solution. People kept saying things like, oh, I assume that would be standard. So they weren't thinking it was something they would pay for. The sales guys were saying, well, we're going to have to give this away. So we had found a problem that was pervasive, but that people were not willing to pay for a solution. So as you think about, what are the key things that you need to have to be successful in your job? Here's a really simple, a minimal viable process, if you'll forgive me, where we discover with doing customer interviews and looking at the myriad customer requests that we have received for an existing product. And from that, we'll build like a 1-page business canvas or business plan that says, this is the thing that I want to, build, the next release or a new product. And from that, we describe with a story backlog. Then we go and start creating using Scrum or SAFe or just using a Kanban board. Then we do our positioning in terms of communicating what our value prop is to the marketing organization, and then empower the sales team with a sales playbook. I mean, you would think, looking at these steps, that would be at least we ought to have that. I worked, however, with an enterprise SaaS company, and they took it much further. Before we leave the discovery step, we want to do extensive customer discovery, define in a formal way what problem we're trying to solve and what success will look like if we solve that problem. And the thing is, this particular team had dozens of potential offerings, dozens of potential solutions. So they went through a formal opportunity scoring process. And from that, they were able to build a business canvas, a 1-pager. Another organization I worked with likes the old school business plan or business case. They went through a formal market validation and did a 3-year financial model and started right away allocating resources to the project. And I don't need to read the rest of this, but you can see where we're going. It's like, to describe, I'm going to need personas. I'm going to need a roadmap. I'm going to need this. I'm going to need that. For creation, for delivery, for connect. So this is a much more extensive sort of process definition. And where are you going to get that? And here's the answer. What do you do? I mean, you think about all the activities that you're involved in. You do customer discovery, maybe you do some prototyping, maybe you do some demos, maybe you do this, maybe you do that. And if you just look at where your time goes, that will help populate your canvas. And one of my concerns is we may be spending, in general, I find product managers are spending most of their time working with development, describing and creating, describing and creating, describing and creating. And if that's all we're doing, who's determining what our future is? And who's making sure that the stuff we built is resonating with the market and generating income, right? And back to this core idea of these product activities, another way of looking at product activities is to look at some of the existing product management frameworks that are out there. Sirius has one, Proficience has one, Sequent has one. After 15 years at Pragmatic, I'm probably most familiar with the Pragmatic Marketing framework. But each of them gives you a lot of really tangible activities and artifacts that you can use to populate your own playbook. So look at where your time goes, look at what key artifacts you need to implement, and use this as a way of saying, you know, am I spending time on all the things that really matter? Because our goal ultimately is to systematically turn good ideas into successful products. We need something more than a cocktail napkin. We need maybe something less than an 85-page business case. Somebody whose name I can't think of right now said, a business case is a document that investors make you write that they don't read. So let me see where I am here. Yeah. So let me hover on this one. And Andrea, let me open it up to some more questions. Any questions about this tool, whether it's the blank tool of your product? Let's do the blank tool. Any questions about this tool as a way of defining your own product playbook? Anybody?
We have quite a few questions about a lot of things, but I did see one. I did see one that caught my attention that is related to that. Let me see if I can find it again. But here we go. I like the way that you define strategy planning and growth, but the describe and create sounds more like execution than planning. Can you please elaborate on this further?
Well, actually, I think of, oh, hang on, let me do this one. So I think of these as the planning bits. This is where we're discovering and documenting and planning. And I see these as the execution bits. That is to say, here, sure, here. In the delivery step, we've got these solutions, we've got this new release, we've got, you know, it's either a new release or a whole new product. We need to do a launch plan. We need to plan on how we're going to deliver it, and then actually connect with the market as part of our launch, you know, empowering the sales team, running marketing campaigns, doing, you know, webinars like this, supporting those programs that will increase growth. So I think of connect, commit, and create as kind of the execution phase. And let me, you know, speak to discovery and commit for that matter. Figuring out what problems we're qualified to solve in the market. And then the commit really is executing, if you will, on what we've learned to articulate what is the business opportunity here. You know, is it something that is viable for this business to create? Is it something that is urgent to our buyers? Is it something that is important to our users? And sign off on this before I start wasting a lot of time on working with development or working with marketing.
Great, thanks for that. Do you want to answer another question?
Sure.
There's a few that have come in regarding at which point of a company's growth should you consider splitting product ops into a separate role or function, or do you think a single person can drive strategy and planning and growth by themselves?
Well, actually, I think those are two different questions, and that's great. Let me do two parts of it. One part is well, having a product playbook is a good idea, but having a dedicated product ops role within the company, I would think requires you to have, I'm pulling a number out of the air, 10 product managers. That when you've got a small team of product managers, you can probably get, share your experiences, sort of standardize. When you've got a large number of product managers and perhaps multiple business units, the idea of product ops starts becoming really attractive. And one way of thinking of it is, if your executive team is frustrated by the outputs they're seeing from product, then yeah, it's time for product ops. But the second part of that question was splitting out roles. So if I was hired years ago in a startup, and I was the only product manager. So guess what? I did all of this. And yet the reality was my boss was probably doing product strategy. I was splitting my time between the product planning shown here and the product growth. And that was difficult. I mean, even in a company of, say, 40 people, it was really hard to be strategic one day and tactical the next, to be focused on strategy one day and focus on growth, the next. And what I ended up doing was allocating days of the week to it. That Monday was my product planning day. I would do stand-ups with my developers. I would answer their questions. We would identify any blockage. I would spend the rest of the day dealing with those situations. And then maybe not every Tuesday, but many Tuesdays, I'd be looking at discovery and strategy stuff. And on Wednesdays, I dealt with product growth. I would work with marketing and or sales. And then on Thursday, I would do all the things that I had promised the rest of the week, which is when I declared years ago Thursday to be Product Management Productivity Day. That's the day we all work from home and get some work done. And then on Friday, we come in and we do demos in the morning. Then we go for a group lunch and, kick out of the office maybe a little early. So in a small organization, one product manager, you're going to be responsible for all of this. And it's really hard to do all of this, particularly if what you've articulated is the enterprise SaaS version of this framework. There's a lot going on there. So I think that there's probably Well, no, we'll do it another way. I think the ultimate answer is, how many hours a week are you spending in each of these activities? And when that exceeds 40 hours, or more realistically, maybe 20 hours, then we need another person. And one of the things that I think we tend to do, which I think is a mistake, is we tend to say, okay, we've got a second product, now let's hire a second product manager. And I think you might be better off to say, we have two products now, let's have one product manager managing two products and one product marketing manager growing those two products. That is to say, you've got the product manager or product owner driving the product planning for the next release or the next product, while the second product manager, now called a product marketing manager or a product growth manager, focuses on supporting all of the go-to-market effort to grow adoption and revenue. It's not an easy definition of when do you need a second person or when do you split the roles. What I find is development and sales and marketing really needy when you get to, well, yeah, if you're real close to development, you get pulled to working with development really closely. At some point, it says, well, but now you're not working on product growth, or now you're not planning your next release. And one of the complaints I hear from product owners is, I haven't visited a customer in or years. And how are you as a product owner able to problems in our customer base if you haven't acted to a customer? That was a long roundabout answer. I don't ultimately answered the question, did I?
I will wait for an answer, but I hope you did.
Let's say.
I believe someone just answered, did they? There's so many questions here. I'm really glad people are engaging. I'm just trying to find a diverse set of questions to ask. Are you going to continue, or would you like some more questions?
Well, I've got just actually. If interesting topic, I have written a book about your own plan. Really walks through this model, mostly this, and says, this is what I mean when I say business canvas, and this is what I mean when I say personas and opportunity scoring and so forth. And so that book is available with unlimited or available for purchase, and just go to turnideasintoproducts.info and that'll take you to my page. And if you want to follow up with me, let me repeat that URL on the top of this slide. u10.me/canvas will take you to the slides from today, as well as a blank worksheet. And here are the other ways you can stay in touch with me, through email and Twitter and LinkedIn. So let's keep going with questions.
Cool. Someone did ask right when you were talking about dividing days of the week for different aspects. Did you find that to be a blocker for the things that you had to do?
No, I found it was the opposite, but maybe, this could just be me. I mean, I'm really good at reacting. So, I would find that I request from development, and I would fill my day with supporting development. And at the end of the day, I'd feel really good about myself. And then I'd realize, well, but I haven't done anything to help grow the product. I've only been focused on the next release. Well, let me do it another way. My first job in management, I was living in Virginia and in Los Angeles. And what I did there, we kind of invented Scrum before there was Scrum. And, golly, I wish I'd written a book. But anyway, I flew out from here to LA one Monday a month. The first Monday of the month, I would fly to LA and I would spend with my dev team. And it was an interesting relationship because, I came in with, okay, here's the roadmap that I was given, here's the backlog that I was given, so I'm here to administer all that stuff. And one of the developers said, well, Steve, what's marketing doing? What has sales done? What are some of the issues that you're hearing from customers? And I was actually delighted because the developers just programmers, just, code. And that's never been my experience. They wanted to know what was going on in the rest of the business. So I would end up spending Monday afternoon briefing them on sales and marketing and number of contracts and recent implementations and success stories and so forth. We'd spend a day on Tuesday and sometimes into Wednesday, but mostly Tuesday we would do story writing, and on Wednesday they would show me some prototypes of stuff they wanted to build based on the stories that I had been providing them this time and prior times. And then we'd have a short day on Thursday, and then I'd fly home. And then I'd given them enough work to keep them entertained, if you will, or keep them fed for the next 3 weeks. And then I would allocate 1 week for going to the corporate offices, and I'd work with marketing and finance and support and professional services and whoever. And then I had 1 week set aside for going on sales calls, which I fervently believe is not product management, it's engineering. But in that organization, sales had a very high need for my expertise, and ultimately I was able to wean them off of me by training the sales engineers to do what I had been doing. But I found that worked fairly well, that I'm available the third week of the month for sales calls. And the sales team said, well, hey, we'll take it, without any sort of structure. I found that I was reacting to emergency du jour rather than really structuring my calendar. And I have found through my career that if you don't own your calendar, then you're out of control.
Emergency du jour. I like that term. I think I'm going to start using it.
Well, one of the questions that I forgot how he put it, but Edwards Deming said, if all you do is deal with fires, you never improve.
That's fair.
Right?
That's a
Right?
good
What you want
statement.
to, right? For our purposes, we want to stop putting out fires and start putting out products that people want to buy. I know, it's crazy talk.
Crazy talk. We have a couple of really interesting questions that have come through, and they're all somewhat related, so I think we can tackle them all at the same time. But how do you see the standardizing of processes working in continuous innovation or continuous delivery? And essentially, how do you provide flexibility, for, let's say, an agile environment with the standardizing of these processes?
Well, it's a standard process, isn't it?
I suppose so.
Right?
It's just
So,
interesting that there's a few people that have asked, do you see this perhaps stifling innovation or going against, the concept of continuous delivery?
I do not. So the graphic, I wish I had a bigger one. The graphic in the lower right-hand corner here is an extended Kanban queue. And that's how I would deal with development. But well, hang on. The real point is somebody has to do some form of work prior to development. We have to identify a problem. We have to articulate a story. We have to sit down with the dev team and groom those stories and have the developers ping us with questions of, did you mean this or did you mean that? And how will you know success has been achieved? That is, what are your acceptance criteria? And then they go off and do a day, a week, 2 weeks of sprinting. And meanwhile, product manager has to go back and start planning more functionality. But I see nothing in this process that is anti-agile. In fact, I feel like I have been agile from the beginning of my career. And my technique was always the Kanban. And that is to say, hey, I've got a bunch of work here for you that you, the dev team, have gone through and said, yes, we know what you mean when you said these things. And then I can continually prioritize that queue until they've taken something from it. And that drives all the way through the dev process. And we can do that on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. And I'm also a huge believer in the same thing in the upper left-hand corner here of deliver and connect. Whether or not you're doing continuous delivery, you still need to be queuing all the work that we're asking of marketing, and writing this stuff down in some format, whether we do it on a weekly basis or not. And I find, a lot of one of the things I find a lot of is that development has gone agile and literally no one else has. So I ran into a team recently. The marketing team said, we need to know what the features are going to be 9 months in advance. And I said, well, I don't know what planet you're living on, but that's never been true. And they're like, oh, no. Back in the old days, we used to do that. And I'm like, no, you actually didn't. Back in the old days, we would build a roadmap and then spend the next 9 months taking things off the roadmap. And they're like, oh, I kind of remember that now that you've said that. My real point is that this tool helps you say, what is the work to be done? What are the jobs to be done to get this stuff into the market? And with continuous learning as our goal.
Thank you for your answer. I think we have time for one more, and we do have a few people that have asked this, which is how do you pitch to management and executives and essentially the team to have a product ops role and implement, playbooks and processes and stuff like that? How do you essentially get people
How
to
do you
want
sell
to
it?
invest?
Sure.
How do you sell it? How do you get people to invest in that?
Sure. Well, here's how you be a consultant. First of all, you have to be from out of town. Second of all, you have to have like a 4-square grid of some kind. But and you need to be able to quote Peter Drucker, Steve Jobs. But mostly, the superpower of consulting is to ask the question, how's that working for you? I wager if you asked your executive team, they would in fact be shocked to see that these things on slide 4 are not already in existence. Do you have standard methods for determining what products to build, building those products, and getting them in the hands of customers? I would think your executive team would say, by God, we better have those things. And the reality is, I read a thing recently that like 40% of Americans are not clear on the scope of their job. And I think that's very true in product management. And some of the other questions we have in here are, how is this different than project management? How is this different than UX design? How is this different than? And here's a fairly well-defined function that is not clear company to company. If you talk to one company, product managers are really sales engineers. In another company, they're really development managers. For instance, I argue that product managers and UX are different. You should have professional UX designers. The reason product managers do UX design is because they're not doing product management, they're doing UX design. And they haven't been, engaging with the market. They've been engaging with development and salespeople and a few users in their customer base. But anyway, I would argue to the executive team the other way, and that is, how's this working for you? Are you happy with the reporting that you're seeing from the product team? Or are you frustrated that everything they show me is different? Are you clear on roles and responsibilities? And it's amazing how many executives I talk to who say, I have no idea what product managers do here, but they're not doing what I wanted them to do. So here are 3 things. Here's the one to take away. Here are the 3 things that keep executives up at night. 3 things. First is, how do we sell more of what we have? The second one is, can we build what we've planned? And the third one is, did we plan the right things? And what I like about standardizing, and particularly standardizing around the 3 roles that I described, is each role corresponds directly to those 3 questions. Product growth says, can we sell more of what we've already built? Yes, I've got a whole person dedicated to growing the product, increasing the adoption, increasing the number of users within a site, expanding, increasing the revenue, increasing, growing the product. Can we build what we've planned? Well, I don't know. Let's have somebody focused on making sure that development has what they need to succeed, and that is personas and problems to be solved. And are we planning the right things? Well, I don't know. Do we have somebody focused on product or portfolio strategy that is grounded in learning from the market, as opposed to God spoke to me in a dream and I think we ought to build this product? So I think this serves as a really helpful metaphor for describing, here's the work that needs to be done, and here's the really frightening part. This work is being done. The question is, by whom? And is it being done systematically? Because again, at the end of the day, our goal is to systematically turn our good ideas into successful products. And if you ask product teams, they'll say there's a fair amount of ad hoc behavior in our company. So regardless of the product ops aspect, you can definitely use this canvas to define your process. I mean, we ought to have a process. I mean, you have a recipe for building food for dinner. Shouldn't you have a recipe for building products, and not just compiling them, but getting them into the hands of people whose problems we want to solve?
Great, thank you so much. With that, we are going to wrap this up. Thank you everyone for attending. As I mentioned, we will be sending out the recording early next week. If you want to watch it back or share it with someone, you can absolutely go ahead and do that. Don't miss our next webinar. At the end of May, we'll be having Lucy Spence joining us. Thank you, Steve, so much. This was a lot of fun for me. We have so many questions, by the way. I am sorry we didn't get to all of them, but we do have on screen Steve's contact, and we will also be sending it out next week if you want to reach out with your questions directly.
That would be wonderful. Well, thanks for hosting this. This was I had a good time. I hope you did as well.
That's good to hear. Bye, everyone, and stay safe.